just as Muhammad was winning his victories and consolidating power in the western area of Saudi Arabia today, we have somebody saying that they can only see my introductory slide. Can other people note whether or not you can see my slides changing?
Yes, Richard, I can see all your slides. So if anyone's having any problems, you should probably try refreshing or restarting yours.
It doesn't have any territorial power beyond that city. And in the case of the Abbasid Caliphate, the city was Baghdad. But it has incredible weight in terms of its ability to speak on behalf of the Catholic people. And the Abbasid Caliph spoke on behalf of the Muslim community, with the exception, of course, of the Shiites, who at this point in time, the Sultanate of Rome, specifically because Rome was their word for Rome, right? They considered themselves to have conquered the Roman Empire. And that's not such a far-fetched assumption for them to have made, specifically because the term Byzantine Empire that we use for the Eastern Roman Empire was not a term that the Byzantines used themselves. The Byzantines called themselves the Roman Empire. So when the Turks conquered them, they considered themselves the Roman emperors now. Which is sort of a funny image for us, looking at it from the modern day and our associations with what Rome represents. But from their perspective, they were the Seljuk Sultans of Rome, and their pronunciation of Rome was Rum. Of giving these kinds of crusaders the ability to conquer land and then repatriate it to him. Because some of them had gone to war with him in the past. For example, Bohemond of Toronto, we're going to talk about him more in subsequent slides, was a historic enemy of the Byzantine Empire and had fought with the Byzantines over their possessions on the Adriatic coast of what's now Greece, Albania, and Croatia. So to trust these people was seen as very difficult, but in exchange for agreeing to repatriate all lands of the Byzantine Empire, Godfrey of Bouillon and the other Crusader knights were given access to food as well as transportation across the Bosporus so they could arrive at Nicaea with their military encampments. Now, somebody's asking if the poet Rumi is named for Rumi here. No. Yeah. All right. So you had the siege of Nicaea, and the knights were able to assemble catapults and trebuchets and other methods of attack of the city. And they were about to take the city in siege when the city itself surrendered to Alexios Komnenos, who had secretly been engaging in negotiations. And this further poisoned the relationship between the Byzantine Empire and the knights, because the knights considered Nicaea to have been their victory. They were the ones who forced the city into a point of capitulation, and Alexios had scooped the victory out from under them. So I have a question of which crusade was Jacques de Molay involved in? I think that was the Third Crusade, but don't hold me to that. So the First Crusade was sponsored by the Byzantine Church rather than the Roman Church. Sponsored in the sense of they were given food and passage, but there was no sponsorship in terms of being paid money. Neither did the Catholic Church pay money. Every crusader was responsible for his own self-financing. So we then move from Nicaea to Dorylaeum. And in Dorylaeum, we have a separation, a slight separation between Bohemond of Toronto and several of the other crusaders, especially led by Godfrey of Bouillon. And because the crusaders separated their forces, the Sipahi and Akinji decided to besiege Bohemond of Toronto, seeing that his force was smaller. And you can sort of imagine what that looks like from both the picture on the left-hand side and the picture on the right-hand side. Bohemond was completely surrounded by the Turks. But one of the things that's worth pointing out is that the armor the knights wore, this chainmail armor, was pretty much impervious to Turkish arrows. So it meant that without a direct melee, they couldn't be defeated. And so you had this sort of slow whittling away of Bohemond's forces, and it was slow enough that the Crusaders, led by Godfrey of Bouillon, was able to attack the Turks from outside of their perimeter and win a decisive victory at Dorileum against the Seljuk Sultanate. Now, after Constantinople, it's entirely distinct. So, I wanted to sort of set a map so we understand what we're talking about when we're talking about the Middle Eastern locations that we're going to mention. So, you have the city of Antioch, which is in the southern part of Turkey. It's part of what's called Hatay province of Turkey. And in Turkish, it's called Antakya today. So that's the city of Antioch. It's very close to the coast, and it was a historically very strong Christian city, one of the 5 major sees of Antioch. You then have the city of Edessa, which is also in Turkey, further inland. The Turks today call it Şanlıurfa. You have the city of Aleppo, which the Arabs call Halep. You have Mosul in northern Iraq. You have Tripoli on the Lebanese coast. You have Damascus, right, which is much further south within Syria, but roughly as far from the coast as Aleppo is. You have Ascalon, which is what the Crusaders and the Arabs called that city, which is now the modern Israeli city of Ashkelon. You have the city of Jerusalem, which in Hebrew is called Yerushalayim, and in Arabic is called Al-Quds. And in Egypt, we won't talk about most of these cities today, but you have the city of Damietta on the Egyptian coast. You have Bilbais, which is a large Christian city towards the mouth the base of the Nile Delta, and you have Cairo or Al-Qahira, which is at the base of the Nile Delta and was the Fatimid capital city. He wasn't going to go south to Antioch, he was going to go east to Edessa. And when he got to Edessa, he found a very interesting situation. This was a territory that had been reclaimed by the Byzantines a short while earlier from the Turks, and the person in charge of ruling it was an Armenian, Toros, but Toros of Edessa had converted to Orthodox Christianity in order to be accepted by the Byzantine Empire. The Armenian Apostolic Church was a different church from the Orthodox Church of Constantinople, which is of course a different church from the Catholics, right? So you have 3 different churches going on here but in what was formerly Seljuk territory or formerly Byzantine territory. And because the Byzantines hadn't been able to assist the Crusaders further, in many ways the Crusaders saw the Byzantines as no longer holding up their part of the bargain in terms of that the land should return to them, because the Byzantines were not providing the food and support that they had promised. And so this becomes the foundation of the Crusader state of Edessa. There's a question of
topic that I don't really know much about. I'm really excited to have a chance to learn more about it. So our thanks goes to you. Well,
yeah, I'm so thankful that so many people are excited. Now, there seem to be several questions in the Q&A, so let's take a quick look.
Someone asked earlier, how did you get initially interested in this topic?
Well, I mean, that's my history, right? My family is Iraqi. We were kicked out of the country because we were Jewish. There was a lot of anti-Semitism both during World War II in Iraq because of the Nazi influence. The Nazis never conquered Iraq, but Iraq became a Nazi ally in 1941. For a few weeks before the British overturned the government. But the sentiment was still strong because of the Nazi connection to Arab nationalism, and just an abridge on that. But because of those things, my family ended up here in the States. But I always grew up around Arabic language. I grew up around understanding this kind of culture and these kinds of behaviors. And I discovered that when I was speaking to many Americans, especially in the wake of September 11th, that they really didn't understand my part of the world. And they didn't understand it because it's either not being represented right on the media, which is fine, or the experts who are being asked to talk about it are being asked to talk about it in 5-minute stints. And as you can see from when I was discussing things here, 5 minutes barely covers anything. And so even if they could say everything that I could say, or they could say even more than I can say, they can't say it in a time frame that really manages to put these things together. And because of my command of English and my command of the Middle Eastern languages that I have, I can access this information in a way and transmit it in a way that I feel that a lot of people can't. So that really got me interested in how can I bring my world to life. And so that's what I do here.
Okay, no, that's awesome. Thank you. Appreciate that. Let me go back to the questions.
I'm going to put a link to Zach's donation account in the meetup page as well. So
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see. Oh, so if we were talking about the film, it was Kingdom of Heaven is the film with Orlando Bloom about the Crusades. And then Catherine chimed in. Thanks, Catherine. She said, watch the director's cut if possible. It's more accurate. So appreciate that, Catherine. That's one thing that's really neat about this group and these programs. There's so many smart people that come here and share their knowledge, not just the speakers. They always end up learning a lot from the audience as well. So thank you very much.
Somebody asked, what's the link up page? No, the meetup page, like how you found on Meetup to come here. I'll put a comment or a couple comments with all the links that you need in order to find me, to find the donations, to find the other episodes in this series. If you're willing to tolerate me, I'm more than happy to oblige you.
And if you don't see the link, don't worry, we'll email it to you.
Somebody asked, can you speak to the continued history of the region, how it informs your view of how history should be represented? That's a difficult question. The thing is that the assumption in the West is that time is progressive, that in each generation, people know what came before and will do something different than what their ancestors did, and that this is the natural rate of change, right? We shouldn't have a situation anymore in the United States where Jim Crow becomes the national law, or something like Jim Crow becomes a national law in the United States. We did that, we're done with that. And Syria, and you can see just how small we're talking about. We're talking about city-states here. I wanted to sort of give sort of a lens into what was going on in the Great Seljuk Empire. So we now move to the Seljuk Sultanate of Rum and sort of discussing what that is. So as we mentioned, sort of covering all of our bases, we can now finally talk about what we actually came here to talk about, which is fantastic. I have a question here. Where did the law, or something like Jim Crow, becomes a national law in the United States? We did that. We're done with that. We're moving forward. The Middle East doesn't. Them might be a view of the future that they want to create. Some of them might be an instantiation of the current situation. Some of them might be a completely different style of government, but not conservative or progressive. So if we look at the Crusades, we have a very interesting timeline, right? Between the First and Second Crusade, we have a long period of time. Between the Second and Third Crusade, we have a long period of time. A scholarly article that goes into this kind of detail. A lot of these scholarly articles focus on one of these periods. I'm giving you sort of an overview of the 18th century. And even after that point, it's still contentious. And those genetic credentials meant that, or something like Jim Crow, becomes a national law in the United States. We did that. We're done with that. We're moving forward. The Middle East doesn't. When they finally settled down, they began to build housing, but the women traveled with the men. By this point, it was still fertile, but it wasn't anywhere near as fertile as it was in the ancient period. And so our current understandings about what fertility was in this region are generally correct.